Good morning, dear students. How are you? I hope you are fine. Today we are going to have novel. Our novel is Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Before we start with the chapter 2, let's remember what happened in chapter 1. In chapter 1, we have a new baby who was born in the workhouse. The baby's mother died after giving birth, and no one knew her name because she was found lying in the street. No one knew where she came from or where she was going to. So the baby was an orphan, as there was no ring on the mother's finger, and no one knew the father. So Mr. Bumble, who was responsible for the workhouse at that time, named the baby Oliver Twist. He named the new babies in the workhouse in order, from A to Z. The boys in the workhouse were hungry and they were cold all the time. They had only 3 meals of thin soup, and on Sundays they had a small piece of bread. So the boys were hungry all the time. They decided to play a game to choose one of them who could go to the master asking for more soup. After playing the game, Oliver was chosen. So he went to the master asking for more soup. But the master went pale and he was shocked that Oliver asking for more food. He called for Mr. Bumble. Mr. Bumble came in and he was very angry. He punished Oliver a severe punishment, and he locked him in a dark room for a week. Oliver was ordered to go out every day in the morning. He was beaten in front of the other boys, and Mr. Bumble also hanged a note on the gate of the workhouse asking for anyone who could take Oliver Twist and take 5 pounds. One day, Mr. Bumble met Mr. Sowerberry. Mr. Sowerberry is the undertaker. He is a tall, thin man, and he wore black clothes. He made coffins for the dead people in the country, and mainly his coffins were for the dead people in the workhouse. Mr. Bumble showed Mr. Sowerberry the notes on the gate and asked him if he knew anyone who can take Oliver and 5 pounds. In chapter 2, we will see what will happen. Chapter 2, he goes out to work. Now, from the title, we can know that Oliver will leave the workhouse and he will go to work. Let's watch the video to know what happened to Oliver.
Now, as you are to meet your new master, pull that cap off your eyes. Hold your head up, sir. Dry your eyes, sir.
Aha! Is that you, Bumble?
No one else, Mr. Sowerberry. I brought the orphan, Oliver Twist.
Oh, so this is the orphan, is it? Mrs. Sowerberry, will you have the goodness to come here a moment, my dear? Oliver Twist? How comes an orphan to have any name at all?
I invented it.
You, Mr. Bumble?
I, Mr. Sowerberry. I name all our foundlings in alphabetical order. The last was S. Swubble, I named him. This was a T. Twist, I named him. Next one as comes will be Unwin, and the next Vilkins. Now I've got names ready all through the alphabet, right up to Z.
Why, you're quite a literary character, sir.
Well, perhaps I may be.
Mrs. Sowerberry, this is the orphan from the workhouse.
Dear me, he's very small.
But he'll grow, Mrs. Sowerberry, he'll grow.
Yes, I dare say he will, on our food and drink. Workhouse boys always cost more to keep than they're worth. Get downstairs, you bag of bones. Here, Charlotte, give this boy some of the cold bits that were put by for the dog. You don't mind sleeping among the coffins, I suppose. Well, it doesn't much matter whether you do or don't, for you can't sleep anywhere else.
Will ya? You the new boy?
Yes, sir.
How old are you?
10, sir.
And I'll whop you up when I get in, you workout.
I beg your pardon, sir. Did you knock?
I kicked.
Did you want a coffin, sir?
You don't know who I am, I suppose.
No, sir.
Well, I'm Mr. Noah Claypole. And you're under me. Now take down the shutters.
After watching the video, now let's take the chapter in main points. Mr. Bumble took Oliver to Mr. Sowerberry's shop, but Oliver didn't want to go. He didn't want to leave the workhouse, and he asked Mr. Bumble to keep him in the workhouse, and he promised him to be polite. But Mr. Bumble didn't care for Oliver. Okay? Mr. Bumble asked Oliver to dry his tears, and he took him to Mr. Sowerberry. Mrs. Sowerberry is Mr. Sowerberry's wife. She is short, thin woman with narrow face. Mrs. Sowerberry didn't like Oliver, and she called him a bag of bones. She pushed Oliver down some stairs, and she offered him the cold meat of the dog. Mrs. Sowerberry didn't care that Oliver, as a young boy, will sleep alone in the shop among the coffins. She didn't care for Oliver. So, when Oliver saw the dog's meat, he ate it quickly because it's the first time for him to see meat and to eat meat. So, he didn't care that he was eating in the dog's plate. Oliver slept in Mr. Sowerberry's shop among the coffins, and he was very afraid, but Mrs. Sowerberry didn't mind, didn't care for him. The next morning, Oliver woke up because of a loud noise outside the shop. Who was knocking the door? It was Noah Claypole. Noah Claypole was standing outside the shop, and he called Oliver workhouse. He kicked Oliver because Oliver didn't know him, and he intended to be rude to Oliver from the beginning. Noah Claypole was a poor boy, but not from the workhouse. He's not like Oliver. He knew his parents. His mother washed clothes, and his father was a soldier who was always drunk. He drank wine all the time. Other boys in the country were rude to him, and Noah decided to be rude to Oliver. He will make his life a sad life. Now it's time for questions. What was the arrangement between Mr. Bumble and the undertaker, Mr. Sowerberry? They arranged that Oliver would go with Mr. Bumble to Mr. Sowerberry, who would be his new master. So now Oliver will work for Mr. Sowerberry. What do you know about Mrs. Sowerberry? Mrs. Sowerberry is Mr. Sowerberry's wife, okay? And she is a short, thin woman with narrow face. She is not kind. She didn't like Oliver. She called Oliver a bag of bones. She pushed Oliver down some stairs. She offered him, or she gave him, the cold meat of the dog. And she didn't mind if Oliver, a young boy, will sleep alone in the shop among the coffins. Oliver didn't taste meat before. Explain, or how did Oliver eat the dog's food? His eyes shone as it was the first time to eat meat. It was the first time for Oliver to see meat and to eat meat. He ate the meat very quickly, and he didn't care that it was in the dog's plate. Where did Oliver sleep at Mr. Sowerberry? He slept in a narrow bed in the shop among the coffins. The shapes of the dark boxes looked like ghosts of dead people, and the place smelled of death. Okay? He was afraid of the coffins. What do you know about Noah Claypole? He was a poor boy, but not from the workhouse. He knew who his parents were. His mother washed clothes. His father was a soldier who was always drunk. He drank wine all the time. Other boys were rude to Noah, so he had the chance now to be rude to Oliver. Okay? So Noah is a poor boy, but not like Oliver. He is not from the workhouse. You don't know who I am, workhouse? Comment. Noah Claypole said this to Oliver when Oliver started his new job at Mr. Sowerberry's coffin shop. Noah came in the morning, knocking the door angrily. Oliver thought that he was a customer who came to buy a coffin. This shows that Noah intended to be rude and to make Oliver's life a miserable one. Sad life. Thank you for your listening, and goodbye.